Welcome back to the channel, and unless you've been living under a rock over the last week or so, you probably already saw the news either on Instagram on Hakes Auctions Instagram page or in any of the Facebook collecting groups for vintage Star Wars items. It was blasted everywhere, and certainly the reverberations within the Star Wars collecting market are still to be seen next year. But if you hadn't seen the news, Jeff Jacob, who is a pretty well-known collector, even dating back to like the Rebel Scum days, big time internet from the 1990s, he has decided to sell his entire collection, and he probably has, if not the greatest collection in the world for licensed vintage Star Wars items. It's definitely in the top 2 or 3. I consider it to be the best collection that exists. He's got pretty much every variation of every licensed product, all graded mocks, loose graded, just everything you can imagine in terms of vintage Kenner Star Wars. He has it, including Palatoys, Lily Lettys. I mean, he's got it all, Revenge of the Jedi proofs, and he did decide to sell the collection. So before we start talking about the repercussions for the vintage Star Wars market, and luckily I was out of town when this announcement happened. I know a lot of you blew up my phone while I was deep sea fishing, and I'm actually saying luckily because it gave me a little time to ponder it, to kind of noodle over what the potential repercussions are for prices for vintage Star Wars items. And I'm not saying that anything I'm going to share is earth-shattering or truly profound, but I did have some time to kind of collect my thoughts, and I kind of summarized those on a cheat sheet here. But I wanted to at least show you the announcement, and we'll watch that live right now. And in case you hadn't seen it, this is on Hakes Auctions Facebook page. It's also on their Instagram. So a very cool promo that Hakes put together announcing this. They did like a countdown and things like that. And I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was a pretty cool announcement, and Hakes certainly is going to be putting a lot of marketing behind the eventual auctioning off of this collection. And, again, if you haven't seen Jeff Jacobs' collection, he's got some old photos from his old videos on YouTube from his collection. You can type in Jeff Jacobs Star Wars and look it up if you have not already. But I think the vast majority of you all have had a pretty good chance to get familiar with his collection. What's interesting is that he also had, Secret Wars and G.I. Joe. I thought he sold off his G.I. Joe collection, mint on card and graded and all that, and vehicles, but apparently he bought it all back. So it's a really truly once in a lifetime type collection. He's got Teenage Mutant Turtles, everything. So what he's going to do with that amazing basement that he custom built for it, who knows? But he did announce that it's going to be sold through Hakes. And first of all, congrats to Hakes for landing this collection. And a lot of people have asked, why do you think he selected Hakes versus Heritage? And we certainly saw Heritage, have some really big prices in their May premiere auction for like the rocket firing prototype FET and things like that. But who knows what concessions Hakes offered in order to handle this entire collection versus Heritage. Obviously you have to pay consignment fees and things like that. In my opinion, if I was going to sell my meager collection, it's nowhere near this good. If I was going to use an auction house to sell my collection, I would personally use Hakes. And, Heritage, yes, they got lots of really high sales in their vintage auction in May, but then we saw in the June auction that the prices were more down to earth and more kind of reasonable and more in line with fair market value. And in the broader scheme of things, I feel like Hakes is a name that I have bought from. I just feel like they're a trusted seller and a trusted auction house, I should say. And I would feel more, if I was going to use an auction house, I would feel more comfortable using Hakes, even if it meant leaving money on the table. Make no mistake, Jeff does not need top dollar for this collection. He's a very wealthy man, from what I can gather. He's a custom home builder and things like that. But anyway, I'm happy for him. I'm happy that that he was able to use Hakes, and they are clearly going to put some serious marketing behind it. As you saw in the promo, Hakes is going to start listing Jeff's collection in January of 2025. They are not doing it all at once, which I think is the right call. It's going to be staggered over the course of 2025. I don't have any inside knowledge on any of this. I just read the comments on the Facebook page, some of the comments from different folks. But, you know, the first question I've gotten a lot is, why do you think Jeff is selling now? And who knows? Who knows what he's, you know, why he decided to sell his collection? I certainly don't have any inside knowledge there. It looked like his wife commented on a few of the Facebook groups as it related to this announcement, that he's just decided to pursue other interests. And, you know, good for him. You know, we all, at some point, the merry-go-round has to end at some point, either because of the hard reality of death, or you need the money, or you just want to diversify. I mean, he's got a lot of assets tied up in this incredible collection. And it's not only Star Wars, obviously, it's all the other things that you saw in the video. And maybe he just has decided that, hey, I'm getting older, and we certainly saw the market peak during COVID, and prices have come back down for the most part, with some blips up and down. But he's got the highest of the highest grade for most of these items. We're talking 85 pluses, 90s, all that kind of thing. So, you know, a lot of these box sets and play sets and things like that, they're the highest possible tier. I do wonder if the AFA population report coming back, and the fact that we can look up these things now, I don't think it played into his decision, obviously, but I do think that it will help sell the collection, because he does have some of the highest graded examples for the vast majority of this collection. And just off the top of my head, I know that he's got some of the highest grades for, like, the Spanish Bosque, for example. He's got a loose graded example of that. That's like the highest graded one in the world, one or two. So, you know, that will play a factor, I think. And we've already seen that play a factor in certain other sales, either on eBay or Heritage or Hakes. So there's a lot of folks that have been, you know, waiting for this moment to happen to fill in holes in their collection. I certainly hope to add something to my collection too. But, you know, the other question I've received a lot privately from you all is, with this huge increase, this huge influx of supply, will it drop prices for everything else? And I think naturally that's going to be the case. Okay. I mean, it's already been kind of moving down, as we've talked about in, you know, in various videos. Prices, for the most part, have come down off of the COVID highs, not only in Star Wars, but in everything else, comic books and anything else that you collect. Prices are not where they were 2 or 3 years ago, but they're still very strong. So that probably could have played a factor into his decision to sell his collection. It's like, hey, I've kind of done everything I can do. You know, Jeff has collected everything. He's won Star Wars, okay? If there is a game for collecting Star Wars, vintage Star Wars stuff, he's won that game. And at this point, he's basically filling in very minor holes in his collection, and the pursuit oftentimes is more fun. The actual path to getting to your collection to where you want it to be is often more fun than actually having it. And I don't know if I would say that if I had this collection, but there is some truth to that, right? I think that my collection is about as big as it can get, realistically, for the space that I have. At some point, enough is enough, and that's kind of where I am. I'm fairly conservative with my money as it is, and I only collect what I have space for. And I don't really have, you know, you guys can see behind me there. I've got my collection room pretty much full at this point. So it's going to be filling in smaller type holes, or buying bigger time comic books, as you've seen in recent videos. to fill in my collection. Jeff, he's on a whole nother stratosphere, a whole nother league or world, if you exist, if you will, for Star Wars collectors. And he's done it all, and it's probably time, he feels like, maybe he's exhausted with it. It can be tiring. I think the other thing that probably does play a factor is for these types of collectors that have massive collections, you don't want to be the last one on the merry-go-round when it comes to selling your collection. He's decided to part ways with his collection at the earlier end of probably the end of the vintage Star Wars collecting life cycle. The future generations, Generation Y and Alpha, we've talked about this. I talked about this in the live stream with Sean over at Reserved Investments. Future generations, my kids' generation, even my kids' generation, those folks are really not going to be interested, in my opinion, in collecting all of this stuff. It takes up a lot of space. Houses are moving smaller. It's become so expensive in modern day America to buy a house. And where are you going to store all of this stuff? And even on a smaller scale like mine, it takes a lot of space. It takes a lot of space. And I think future generations of collectors, they're going to minimize. And I've already seen it with my kids, where my son and my daughter, they play video games. They like Fortnite, all the usual stuff. And I could see them eventually, if they were, high net worth individuals when they get to be my age, I could see them collecting, sealed video games or nothing at all. And I just think that the idea of collecting our childhood past maybe has gone the way of the dodo after Generation X. That's, there certainly will be exceptions, but I think that there's a very high likelihood that the Star Wars collectibles market will slowly fade away as Generation X moves into retirement and eventually passes away. That's probably not what you want to hear, but I think that's probably the truth. And, I'm probably, like Jeff, going to sell my collection at the earlier end of the life cycle for Star Wars collectibles. I don't know how accurate this is, but, this person did some research and looked at, this is all last year's data, but they looked at eBay sales for vintage Star Wars items, and they're assuming a 5 to 6% market share for eBay versus the entire market for Star Wars collectibles. Based on his estimations, the secondary market for Star Wars is worth $3.3 billion worldwide today, and 120 million in the UK. This is a UK author. So as it relates, going back to the idea of increased supply from Jeff Jacobs' sale of all of these awesome, very high grade items, it's a small blip, but it is a major blip because, as I said, they're all the highest of the high grade. So I think what it's going to do is, at least in the short term, it's going to create a ceiling for a lot of the prices for these really high-end rare items. And if it sells on Hakes and it's an AFA 95 of a proof card, Revenge of the Jedi proof card for the Death Star droid, I'm just picking a random item out from this photo that I have up right now, or the Boba Fett proof card, it's going to create a ceiling, and everything else is going to be slotted under that's lower grade. So whether that's true or not, who knows? But I do think that some of these items are tough to find. I mean, just even, Revenge of the Jedi proof cards are not terribly rare, right? But for certain characters, they don't come up on the market often. And Boba Fett is a good example of that. The Death Star droid, some of these Power of the Force items, they just don't come up that often and in this kind of grade. And so I think what's going to happen is that as these items work their way through Hakes auctions next year, that's going to create the ceiling. And then if Jeff's item, it was an AFA 85 and yours is an AFA 80 or a 75 and so forth, it might change the pricing dynamics, at least in the short term. Now, do we have another mega run-up in Star Wars collectibles in the future? Well, I think it relates to content, right? And Certainly the content lately from Disney has not been very good. There's been some hits like Andor, Mandalorian Season 1 and 2, and then there's been some mega misses like The Acolyte, like The Book of Boba Fett. And, the future movies, I think, will play a big role as to how well a lot of these vintage items hold up in terms of value. But, there's going to be a slowdown, in my opinion, and there's going to be many more collections, maybe not as nice as Jeff's, definitely not as nice as Jeff's, but there's going to be more folks like this that are going to use this as a litmus test for their own massive collections as to whether they should sell. Could it lead to future panic selling from other collectors that maybe are not as well off financially as Jeff or, other collectors? If a lot of them have a significant portion of their wealth tied up in vintage Star Wars items, and there are people out there that have massive portions of their wealth, in Star Wars. It could lead to some future sales, massive sales like this. But I think a lot of people are kind of taking the wait and see approach to see how these hold up in 2025. I think there's going to be a lot of people afraid to sell their items using Hakes or Heritage next year. Who wants to sell their AFA 80 Revenge of the Jedi proof card for Luke X-Wing when you know that at any moment the AFA 85 or 90 that's in Jeff's collection is going to get sold, and at potentially the same time or the month after? So it could be the type of situation where, other than Jeff's collection, other folks may hold off next year. But hats off to Hakes. I hope that they do his collection well as it relates to marketing it. I'm sure they will. They always do a great job. And I would probably use Hakes myself. So, but it is interesting. Let me know what other thoughts you guys have as you saw this announcement. But I think that we're going to see many more collections like this over the next 10 to 20 years, including myself, because I've got 2 kids that are twins going into college at the exact same time in like 7 years or so. And so I'm probably not too far behind Jeff, admittedly, on a much smaller scale, like a 1% of what this is, or a 0.5% of what his collection is going to net. But it's going to be a multi-million-dollar sale and lots of supply. And I think for those of us that are still collecting, it's a good opportunity to add a high-grade, hole in your collection type of item that maybe doesn't come up very much. But what an awesome collection. I can't wait to see how those sales do next year. But, I think that, for me, as it relates to my collection, I'm not panicking because I don't, I view my collection as like a very small, minuscule percentage of my net worth. But if I had a large collection that was 50 or 60 or 80% of my net worth, then yeah, I probably would really be concerned about this. Having such a large amount of high supply of high grade items in such plentiful supply, all hitting the market within a 12-month time frame. Yeah, I could see being maybe a little bit disturbed about that. So take that for what you will. And it's only June, right? It's only June of 2024. You got 6 months. If you've got a collection that you've been thinking about selling, and you don't want to be competing with these higher grade items, if you happen to have 75s and 80s and things like that, and you don't want to be competing with 85s and above, like most of Jeff's collection is, now's a pretty darn good time to sell it, I think. The prices are still very strong. Assets in general are still way up in a high inflation environment, and you could do a lot worse than selling it right now before this supply hits the market. So hopefully you got something out of this. I just thought it was a really interesting time frame that he decided to go ahead and sell his collection. And I'll be watching these auctions and rubbing my hands together like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons, hoping to add maybe a few more Boss or Death Star droids to my runs. And I'm sure you guys will be doing the same thing. That's all I really had for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks as always for watching, and good luck to Jeff on the sale of his awesome collection next year using Hakes Auctions.